Taking into account the new age of television, this morning we're taking a fresh look and have chosen to consider this question from the perspective of what is a hit today and what exactly does it mean to be a hit. And we're delighted that an outstanding panel comprised of network executives and heads of research who dedicate much time and extensive thought to this question are here to share their thoughts and perspectives. And to introduce them and to moderate what I know is going to be a very lively conversation this morning, please join me in welcoming Michael Wolff.
I want to begin by giving myself a promotion. I have a new book coming out, and the title of the book, and this is going to go right to the heart of everybody here, is Television is the New Television. And it's an argument which is really germane to everything that we're going to be talking about here, and it is that, well, let me cut to the bottom line. Forget digital. Everybody, even all of the people in the digital world, want to be in television. Television has never been more exciting, never been more central. It has, it is the business of the future. So, but with that, let me go to the top line and not bury the lead. There is a crisis, Alan.
Yes. Oh. No, I was ready to leave. If somebody says the business is great, you have a future, I'm ready to say case closed and move on. No, look, I'm a research guy. I'm going to get some of the research stuff out of the way. It's a little boring just to say, yeah, there's a crisis in measurement. And the reason is that we are a business that produces ratings. And if you can't measure it, you can't sell it, you can't evaluate it, you can't understand it, you certainly can't know what a hit is. And the problem is that the currency we use, which is Nielsen, which was used for well over half a century, is just unable now to follow, as Michael said, all of the consumer changes that are happening. And I mean, we all know what's going on. People are behaving in a very different way. And I'm not here to say that the declines in viewing to conventional legacy programming is all about measurement. I mean, I know that, people are watching lots of different things. But the reality is so much of it is a function of Nielsen's inability at this point to follow the new ways people are basically consuming content. And I'll give you a very, very quick example. If you take a show like The Blacklist, which is one of our franchise programs, we found that 17% of the viewing to a long-form episode on average is being done, and this is the long form, not clips, on platforms, PC, tablet, a smartphone that isn't being measured by Nielsen. And if you put it into context, that 17% equates to about 1.3 million 18 to 49 viewers. And there's nobody in this room that would say that that's an insignificant number. And one more point is we all know that these changes in technology and consumer behavior are only accelerating. So the concern that we have now is simply growing. And I can say that this isn't just an NBCUniversal problem. I mean, it affects the industry at large. And I would estimate that somewhere between 15% and 40% of viewing to various programs, depending upon their composition, are not being measured. So that's, I think, what the crisis is.
I think maybe it's a good idea to look at this as a definitional problem too, and it's a definitional problem about television. What's television? And it's a definitional problem about measurements, since we're now in a world of which, we used to be in a world in which there was one measuring entity. Now there's a world in which everybody is a measuring entity, everybody has a measuring standard, and everybody seems quite allowed to produce their own measurements. But the definition of television, Kern.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, because when Nielsen fails to capture these other streams, when they continue to look at television as a platform, as a big screen that sits in your living rooms, they're missing the evolution of the industry. They're missing out on the very vision that we are in the business of TV, the art form, not TV, the platform. Our business at Viacom is telling stories, great and small, that connect and create conversations and move culture forward. So for us, it's not just about the numbers of people that are watching outside of the primary screens in their living rooms. Those numbers are huge. But when I see Nielsen failing to count those tablets and those streams, I don't think they're just missing an opportunity for monetization. I think they're missing the golden age of television.
Yeah, Dave, let's just talk about, it would be great if we could come up with literally a new definition of television. A television, something that defines television as we've always done, as this thing that comes out of a box.
Yeah, I think you have to focus on the program. So you make a television program. I think people associate television with a device, a television set. And they say, that's television, and if I watch the program on my phone, that's not television. We're a content company. We make television programs. The CBS television programs this year will end up the season with a higher average audience than they did 10 years ago. So our television programs are very successful. They're just, that consumption is taking place on phones, it's taking place on laptop computers, it's taking place outside of the measurement environment, outside of the advertising environment, in ways that there are new ways and new opportunities to watch television programs. So if you look at it from the content point of view, this is the golden age of television. The American public today, the average American, when we survey them, say there are more good television programs on the air today than they have time to watch. So, yet, I think the biggest problem this industry has right now, I don't think it's measurement. I think it's misinformation. I think the perception out there, because of the way the press handles things and the reporting and everything, is there's just total misinformation about what really is going on.
Let's go to that. How do you function in a world in which Nielsen gives you very, very precise, the kind of measurements in the kind of way that they have pretty much always done?
Well, it's not precise. And in fact, we were so frustrated at the beginning of the season that we were missing this measure, the long tail, if you will, that we basically said every day when we come out with the overnight rating that we're also going to provide to the press and to the street and anybody else an estimate for the 3-day viewing, for the 7-day viewing, and also for the contribution of digital. And that makes a huge difference. And again, we find that these estimates can be very, very accurate if you have enough track, of a program. And the reality is, we're just trying to say to everybody, don't look at the number that you see the next day, because it is almost irrelevant in today's environment.
Well, it's also dealing with the idea of a daily rating. We have to function because it's a business in terms, from the advertising perspective, what we're selling to the advertiser. But the number, if you look at the top, the question today was, what is a hit? All right, well, Big Bang Theory is a hit. It's one of the top 2 shows. NCIS, Big Bang Theory, the top 2 shows. Big Bang Theory has an average weekly audience of about 24 million when you count all the different windows. That's a huge audience. But 64 million people a week watch Big Bang Theory. They watch it on USA, they watch it on PBS, they watch it in syndication. But that show is being watched by 64 million people every week. That's a phenomenon. That's what that show is about. Culturally, that's the significance of Big Bang Theory, not what advertisers are paying for a 30-second spot.
Set a context there for that. So Big Bang Theory, one episode of Big Bang Theory makes more money than a week of YouTube. And yet, the entire world is obsessed with YouTube, YouTube's numbers, YouTube's future, and YouTube as a replacement for the television business. How did that happen? What do you think is really at the root of this perceptual misalignment?
It's interesting. I think that it goes back to what we were saying a moment ago about defining what television is. And I'll tell you, one of the things that we obsess over is that, we think that what is television is changing dramatically, and I think that's cultural, and it's it's cultural, it's in information. Today, we're competing, and it goes back to, I think, great content, great storytelling. I think the platforms are relevant, but is all the really amazing original video that's being created for digital platforms not television? We think it is television. A lot of the incredible stuff that's being done on YouTube, high quality scripted drama that's being done on digital platforms, a show like Blue. This is television, but it's being consumed by different people in different ways. So, and it's culturally cutting through. So I think one of the, I'm not an English lit major, and this is embarrassing, but somebody wrote it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. I don't know who that was, but I feel like that's what we're living through now. It's the worst of times because we're all struggling with the economic models that are the endemic models. We're struggling with a loss of audience, a loss of measurement. We certainly know that. We feel it every day. It's impacting our bottom lines. But when you're on the content side, it's also the best of times. I mean, we talk about a new golden age of drama. I mean, some of the new shows that are coming along are phenomenal. I think we counted 64 different outlets or platforms are commissioning original scripted programming right now. 64 across television, broadcast television, cable television, OTT platforms like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, of course, and digital platforms as well. And a lot of it's really, really good. The consumers never had more choice. I think that what's happening is a lot of this phenomenal storytelling. There's been an interesting movement of talent. Talent, that's such another interesting conversation, is moving across these platforms. So, auteurs and writers and directors who maybe a decade ago would never have thought to do cable are now absolutely, I mean, those barriers have gone down. Now they're doing digital. Now they're doing OTT. So culturally, I think that there's an impact. So what we get up in the morning and we read are the headlines. And the headlines are.
I want to come back to this idea of the definition of redefining television, calling it what it is, although we don't have a word for that. But before getting there, I want to go back to Nielsen, because that's sort of the anchor of holding us down to the original definition.
But I don't know that it has to be. I feel like at Viacom, we faced this crisis in our business and made a determination to move beyond it. And we're pretty stalwart in our commitment to produce great content that resonates with our audience. And to do that, we're finding new ways to connect with that audience and understand what they want to engage in. And then we build it, we make it. And if it's not showing up in the numbers that we want from Nielsen, we find other ways to track it. But we have premieres that are going out, doing a number on Nielsen, and doing triple the number in full episode streams in the same time period across our digital platforms.
Well, let's get it to the bottom line here. Is there a world beyond Nielsen? Is Nielsen obsolete? Is Nielsen the thing that actually we're fighting against?
I think Nielsen, you need a currency, okay? It's a business. You need a currency that is, basically established across, the entire industry. And for better or worse, it's Nielsen. And I don't think there's going to be anybody, and I've looked, believe me, that's going to come in and challenge, Nielsen. But here's the deal, I think. I think Nielsen will become increasingly marginalized for the very reason you heard. They're incapable of doing certain things, and it's only getting worse. So for example, they've even admitted that our business network, CNBC, is not measured effectively by Nielsen. Nielsen admitted that. And so we went out and basically got another supplier, Cogent, to try to basically measure the stuff that Nielsen can't measure. I think we're all doing that. We're trying to add on to Nielsen basically some, Nielsen, that one size fits all isn't working anymore. And so we have to add these things in. But again, let's be honest. I mean, if anybody here is basically an advertiser or an ad buyer, they're not going to accept any of our numbers because it's an adversarial kind of conversation. So you have to have that underpinning of, quote, some sort of objective referee. But the problem is, or the issue is, I think that Nielsen will become increasingly less important to be replaced by things like targeted ratings, to replaced by things like, engagement, to replaced by all these different kinds of measures that we believe get a lot closer to the reality of the way people are consuming whatever you want to call this new television.
Is that a new third party that grows up, somebody who we haven't seen out there who's going to replace or compete with Nielsen and replace them, or is it are we in a position to have to sell our own numbers?
Well, I guess I'll be the defender of Nielsen here. Okay, so in the first place, so we tell Nielsen what we want them to measure. We set the standard. Advertisers are a lot at fault. Advertisers don't accept the new reality. They only want their advertising for the first 3 days. They don't want to pay for anything after 7 days. They don't want to pay for DVR playback 30 days out. Half the things we're talking about are things advertisers are trying to get for free. So essentially, the advertiser is limiting what Nielsen can do. And so what we've done, what we're seeing at the same time is that we see CMOs and corporations that all of a sudden are saying, we're not sure television advertising works anymore, which is absolutely not true. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, advertisers and advertising companies are moving money out of television. They're lowering the quality of their television buys, and because the procurement people are trying to reduce the CPMs, and they're killing themselves. They're killing their brands. These things don't work. So we're switching totally from measurement to performance-based. We're telling advertisers this year, forget the ratings. We're going to tell you how many cans of soda you sold, how many movie tickets you sold with this advertising campaign. And that's where Nielsen has pivoted. And they're in that business. Nielsen Catalina, Nielsen Buyer Insights. These are tools using single source databases and using product information. We have to shift to telling advertisers and demonstrating to advertisers, this is how much money you made when you advertised on television.
I agree with you 100% there. Just for a second, for sure it's a currency of impact, and we could argue about whether that's something that Nielsen's going to solve or something somebody else is going to solve with a much larger, more stable sample. Regardless, though, I think that is what advertisers want to pay for. I think that the fight we're going to need to fight there in this new economics of attribution is with our digital competitors, because they have set up a dialogue already where they've told advertisers, and they've started to destroy these brands because they've told advertisers that the last link in the chain is where the causality lives. And it's just not true. And we need to reshape that conversation so that we can recognize the value we're creating in awareness, in advocacy, all of the cultural impact that may be reverberating through these social platforms, that may be showing up at these new water coolers that are very well monitored and very well instrumented. But we need to take a step back and help our advertisers understand, hey, you know what? Those water cooler conversations, Poland Spring doesn't get credit for those. We created them. We are the cultural force behind them.
But step back. I mean, totally agree there, and I want to go there. But step back to those numbers, having to deal across the business and cultural spectrum with the scale that digital claims to represent.
I think it's
so
not just
essentially you have BuzzFeed, which says wherever it can possibly say it has 150 million visitors, an audience larger than the Super Bowl. Okay, there's something profoundly wrong with that. There's something profoundly wrong with it at the same time that the New York Times is perfectly willing to accept that on face value.
It's perception. There's a perception game that they're winning, and I think.
But how can they possibly win this perception game when it's literally we have an audience as big as the Super Bowl, but we make the same money that New York Magazine makes? This is?
Yeah, it's either part of it's being the bright shiny new toy, part of it is speaking for a millennial generation. I mean, I think those things resonate, and I think that that's a place where, as an industry, we really do need to, combat that a little bit. I also think that, listening to the room, one of the things that we're all struggling with and dealing with is this movement of advertising dollars from traditional television to digital platforms, and I think a lot of that has to do with. It seems to me we're moving to a more data-driven. Environment. And I think that one of the advantages that a lot of the digital platforms has is this ability to have, data that we don't do. It's that, we are in the one-to-many, right? We're in the one-to-many business. They're into the one-to-one business. And I think these things all feed this sort of perception that somehow they're offering a much more engaged platform, a much more targeted platform.
Except it does, I mean, it certainly feeds that perception.
It's a perception thing, yeah.
But the perception, to my mind, largely goes unchallenged. So there is that one-to-one, although most people actually are not seeing the ad anyway because it doesn't load by the time they're off the page.
Or
Yeah, well,
they grazed over it on Facebook.
But to
and it's
David's
counted.
point, I mean, at some point, there's an efficacy thing. And, you know, there's a reason why the average tenure of a CMO is like 12 months, because it's got to work. And so, you know, I think there's going to be a time, you know, shiny and toy and all that, when people are putting money into these things. And look, if it works, and maybe it'll work for some people, God bless them. But when it stops working, I think there's going to be, you know, I mean, people don't remember, but back in the 70s, P&G said, we're getting out of the daytime business. It's stupid. We're not going to advertise in that thing. Well, a year and a half later, they came back because they weren't selling the products they had to sell. So I think that becomes, you know, a major criteria. But to your point, Michael, about, you know, why we have this perception, whether we like it or not, Nielsen winds up being, you know, sort of the reflection of what the industry is. And what troubles me is that people, because they're looking at these flawed numbers, are getting the idea that the pie, the use of the video medium, whatever, is shrinking. Well, it's not. If anything, as David, and we all see the same thing, it's expanding. It's just not being measured. If the pie's shrinking, we all have a problem. If it's expanding and the slices inside are a lot smaller, that's okay, because that's the job of my program guys and, you know, the different people in the company to sort of get a bigger slice of that pie. But the problem that I have, the biggest problem, is that the overall perception of this industry is that it is shrinking, and it is just, in my view, absolutely wrong.
What?
Well, on the digital side too, I mean, there is this concept that there is, with sophisticated targeting, that that is better than television measurement. And when this first started, the whole pitch of the digital side was, well, we can tell you exactly who clicked. Remember, and it was all about clicks, and so we actually tell you that an action was taken with your ad, and therefore we're better than television because you don't know that an action was taken. Well, the fact is, actions taken every single day, every minute, based on television advertising, but they're just not measured. These clicks were being measured. Now we've discovered clicks are totally not relevant at all to sales. There are bots involved. They're all this fraudulent problem. So that whole system, that whole superior analytical framework for digital that moved advertising dollars to digital and got people excited in digital was bogus. It doesn't work. It's not functional.
And judging,
and right now, the digital side cannot demonstrate effectively the return on investment for digital. Most digital investments by advertisers are not accounted for with a return on investment analytics. I can measure every television campaign and provide a return on investment measure for a television campaign. I challenge anyone in the digital side to be able to do that.
and
they can't.
One of the effects, of course, of this, a 10-year effect, is that CPMs in digital have gone down and down and down and down, and without any sign that they
Yeah, I mean,
that they
when
will
you
ever
ask
recover.
an advertiser why they're going to digital, they tell you reach and it's cheap. Well, reach is not right. They don't get reach effectively. It's really because it's cheap. The procurement people got television CPMs as low as they could, started selling exchange-based television for very, very low CPMs. They couldn't get any lower, so they discovered, digital, lower CPMs, even. So they're moving money. Believe me, it's
Now
driven
turn
by,
that around, though, on a circle here, because having the digital world, having realized that, now seems very intent on getting out of that business, getting into, for the last couple of years, the video business, and now getting into the premium video business, or which I've recently heard described as the premium plus video business, which to me is the television business.
So that's
Yeah,
exactly
well, absolutely.
that's exactly right, and I think this is the danger when we start to push too hard on digital and we start to just allowing them to even own that term. What is television not digital? Are we not talking about the growth and reach of our programs across all these devices? Are we not getting out to audiences where they live? Viacom is on Snapchat. We are part of this ecosystem. That is where people want to find content. So that the new word for television needs to accommodate this shift to a multi-platform world.
I think you're seeing, so yes, I agree 100%, and I think one of the things that we're seeing is that, I mean, at our company, we are spending a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to sort of divine where some of this is heading, protect our base business, but position the company to be relevant 5, 10 years from now. And you know, I think that some of the digital players that are now entering really quality video, they are great brands. They're creating brands that, for better or worse, do speak to audiences. And I think that some of the blue chip dollars that are going to some of these platforms are going there because there's a perception that they speak for a very difficult to find audience. Vice Media is a good example of a company that we've invested in that has done a great job of speaking to this sort of the millennial men. They're attracting, really significant dollars from blue chip advertisers. These are sponsorships. It's branded content. This is where things seem to be heading. So it's less directly related to the spots and dots.
Vice is one of those good examples of essentially a digital company, a company that grew up in digital, that made its reputation in digital, and which has been desperate to migrate out of digital back to a relatively traditional form of
Which should give
television.
all of us some comfort that that we have a phenomenal business.
No, I think
but it's an
it
interesting
should.
circular.
It's interesting in that they want to be in this business and we find ourselves in crisis.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at if you look at the digital, you say, what are people doing on their laptops? What are they doing on their iPads? Well, they're watching television programs. And I mean, Big Bang Theory, I tell you, Big Bang Theory has 24 million, well, 1.4 million of them are digitally delivered. And that audience, by the way, is 18 years younger on average than the TV audience for Big Bang Theory. So we're totally embracing digital. Our digital CBS.com original content is sold out. I mean, we're in the digital business, but we perceive it, again, it's a program. We take a television program. Right now, our mentality is, we have a television program. Where can we sell this program? Where can we monetize this program? So, we're talking digital, you're talking Netflix. They're all customers. They're all ways to get a television program to the public. And whether it's digitally delivered or delivered on a traditional television screen, it doesn't really make any difference anymore.
Well, it does as long as it's measured. That's the thing. We don't care where you see it. We just want to get credit for that.
There's another question which we should go to Q&A, which you don't have to answer. I just want to put it on the table. The difference in the perceptual difference between television wholly supported by advertising and television that is supported by essentially paid for, and how that skews the idea of the hit and skews the idea of measurement. But let's not answer that quite now, and let's go to the...
Hello. Hi. Joe Marchese at Purposes. I get to use the new company at 21st Century Fox. Dying during the panel, so I just want to, I hate when people do this, but I'm going to throw out a couple of things. One, the reason digital is eating our lunch is because we came to their format and are playing by their rules. BuzzFeed has that many of an audience because that's how they defined impressions. If half the ad for 2 seconds counts for an impression, we should run 40 ads per pod because that's the definition we're willing to trade on. That's how it got cheap, right? Second, I get really concerned with the outcome-based measurement. I agree we should measure outcomes, but are we going to help them price the soda and the packaging and where they ship the soda to make sure that it's something that people want to buy? And the other thing on measurement on all these platforms is, yes, I want to get credit for everywhere the show runs, but then are people watching the ads when they see the show on all those platforms with ad blockers and minimization and DVRs and fast forwarding? So Nielsen measuring all these other platforms is perfectly possible, but it's the agencies, I forget who said the agencies were like driving Nielsen to say, no, we want to keep this currency, we want to get this for free. And it's the digital players who are saying, no, we want a lowest common denominator for what we call an impression. Like the TV impression is the whole ad, or the whole screen for 30 seconds. So I guess where I come back to is, how can we get together and start to say, we're going to set a higher standard? We're going to set a higher standard, and advertisers can buy on this higher standard. And I bet Nielsen would actually come along with us and say, we would like a higher standard in digital that's more analogous to what a TV impression looks like. And then figure out how we're going to get consumers to actually watch the ads. Because what's the point of measuring a show when the ads aren't in it? That's what...
It's incredibly succinct and and on the money.
We agree.
Well, I mean, it's absolutely right. I mean, a television...
You can have my seat.
A commercial...
Have a deviled egg.
It is, you know, what is an advertising impression? And that, again, is why... now, I think we're talking about the same... You said you worry about return on investment, kind of, you know, whether it works. And certainly that's true. In the first place, the number one thing that determines how successful a television campaign is the effectiveness of the advertising message. Television works. It works better if you actually have a good ad than it works if you have a bad ad. But television works. So the ad is very important, and we're actually looking at that right now. We're looking at how does advertising work. We're trying to work on an experimental basis with, if you see an ad on YouTube, what's the difference between seeing an ad on YouTube versus seeing an ad in the context of a television program?
We've done some of that same research, and our initial studies are showing that you've got an engagement bump of almost 4x based on the quality of the content around an advertising message. So I agree with you 100%. You know, getting to parity on understanding what an ad unit is and what really creates an impression feels critical. I think then further we need to take that argument to, hey, context matters, right? Seeing something scroll past while you're getting updates on your grandmother's last trip to Florida is not the same as seeing it in a program in which you're leaning forward, you're engaged, and you're passionate about what you're viewing.
Small anecdotal point, we had a promo for Dig, which was one of the shows that we have on, and it was programmatically run on YouTube and wound up adjacent to an ISIS video. So that's one of the problems. I mean, that's just not a measurement problem. That's just a technical problem with respect to advertising on some of these platforms where there's no product protection and you really don't know the content that you're running up against.
So this is Kay Koplowitz. It's interesting just listening to all the problems that are encountered trying to measure all the different technological delivery systems, right? That's what we're talking about. Television goes across many different platforms today. It's no longer the description of broadcast television. It occurs to me that if we had a technology that could be embedded in the program that would trace the program through every cycle of its viewership across all platforms, therefore not measuring the platforms, but measuring inside the program and answering Joe's question about how long did someone view it, that would be a real breakthrough. Has anyone encountered anything quite like that?
I think that there's, you know, Nielsen works on a system of watermarks, among other things, and the technology for doing that, I think, is available. I think that the industry dynamics that we've talked about, and frankly, Nielsen's failure to respond and invest on the right kind of timeline is what's holding us back. But that kind of technology is available, and it does exist.
Disruptive technology here. So I think that this would be a disruptive technology that would solve at least a number of the problems that we're talking about.
Well,
so anyone want to do that? You can really
well, there are a lot of people trying, I mean, and mostly it's smartphone-enabled technology where the smartphone can identify the environment and record record what is being watched on a television set from audio fingerprinting. What?
We can do
I mean,
that.
how do you get around selling How do you sell what Nielsen is not measuring is essentially the question.
So I happen to think that the answer there lives in giving them something better to come to, right? It's not pushing back and saying, hey, Nielsen missed it. It's offering a better, more targeted, more integrated approach that really addresses their marketing, the kinds of marketing outcomes they want to achieve. And that happens through targeting, it happens through mix modeling, it happens through the right kind of attribution economics and science all together so that we're providing a marketing solution. And when you bring something like that to an advertiser, the idea that we're going to tie it back to males 18 to 34 becomes totally irrelevant to the process. It just doesn't make sense in the context of a highly targeted buy going through a closed loop attribution measurement, as well as sort of a general sense of brand building and marketing outcomes. You can't measure it that way. And so advertisers then, even if they're paying more, know they're getting more and they're ready to move away from Nielsen. And Viacom's had some success in the marketplace over the last year and a half, selling exactly that way. And I think ultimately it's where we're all going to need to go.
Hi, Betty Cohen. Even though the subscription services like Netflix and Amazon don't compete in a very literal sense for ad dollars, they are training people to watch TV without commercials at all, and they're not so far having to report or feel the need to report any measurement of their viewing. To what degree are they a threat, and are they contributing to the sense that television, ad-supported television, is in some way in danger?
Well, they're very disruptive because you can watch TV and have a second device in your hand and do both, but you really can't watch 2 television programs at the same time. And look, I have to give Netflix huge credit. When we ask consumers, do they like the service? They don't like it, they love it. And you know, 30% of internet traffic in prime time is Netflix. So I've always been concerned with the fact that by selling our products to Netflix, it's always been a double-edged sword. We're sort of teaching people a behavior that's going to come back to kill us. But the reality is that, I mean, Netflix is a major factor in what's going on. And that, to be honest with you, I mean, you can't change that. But that's one of the reasons why, if we don't get credit for the viewing that we are getting, you know, we're just sort of hurting ourselves a second time around.
I mean, I would completely agree with you. I think that Netflix, Amazon, like a lot of the OTT players that are now doing original programming and that are also offering some of the best content that you guys are all creating, you know, it's offering a different kind of consumer experience. And I think we were having this conversation beforehand that technology enables the consumer is eventually going to win. And I think that from the creative point of view where we live and when we're talking to creators and trying to, you know, it's upping all of our game, I think. I think that one of the things we do know is that, you know, the best shows win, you know, and I think that this experience that the consumer has without interruption, it's kind of requiring all of us to sort of up our game, tell better stories, tell them with more engagement. So I think it's having a profound impact perceptually in the industry. It's having a profound impact on consumer behavior. It puts us directly at odds, so you have a conversation about fast-forward disabling, which I find interesting because it's certainly protective of the model. Yet at the same time, my God, I mean, that's the worst thing in the world from a consumer point of view, and the consumer's got alternatives. Puts us in quite a bind. So I think that these OTT players are changing the conversation, changing the dialogue, changing the business.
Well,
Well,
in a conflicting world of business models, and it's not only the OTT players. I mean, it's much of cable has a different kind of programming because it has to it needs subscribers.
Netflix. What's the difference between Netflix and HBO and Showtime? The difference is that you had to buy a cable subscription and at a digital level to get HBO and Showtime. So but the quality of the programming, the combination of original programming and movies, they're available on HBO and available on Showtime. And that Netflix brilliantly realized that these two really great services cannot break, they're tethered to cable subscriptions, and that's reducing the amount of people who buy them. So they came out and they said, we're going to offer that service without that
Except that Netflix is also tethered to a
It requires
cable
a cable.
subscription.
I think that
I mean,
there
that's this
Well,
kind of.
no, it's not cable.
Broadband.
Broadband.
I mean, well,
you have to have
yeah.
broadband.
you need a cable box.
Yeah, try to buy broadband
I mean, the one
without
thing that
the-
Netflix has that HBO and Showtime don't have, because of the nature of their distribution, is an unlimited library. Okay, so HBO and Showtime they ran 24 hours worth of programming. They were limited by the amount of programming that they could put on. They didn't have these huge libraries that you could access all the time.
Well, I think
now they do.
I think that's a key point, though. What Netflix is doing, and I think I love them for two reasons. One is they're challenging the industry to move, and mostly they're challenging the distributors to move to a larger on-demand library and to free the content, because mostly what people, if you talk to them about what they want in TV, it's not TV everywhere, it's TV anytime. I think, so they are moving us forward in that way. The other thing, frankly, that I love about Netflix and that our ad sales group loves about Netflix is they're a major advertiser and growing. Every time their subscribership drops, they come back to television and they start running more ads.
Yeah, there's one other difference that I would call out, and I think it's sometimes with all the headlines that you got to keep it in. Companies like Amazon, and they're technology companies first and foremost. They have hundreds of engineers, and they're based on algorithms and recommendation engines, and that is something that I think that they brought to the consumer that's new and different than even an HBO or a Showtime. I mean, I think if there's I would say with some humility, I think that the MSO community that's so important on the cable side, I mean, they were really in many ways were the very, very first to put, a hard drive in everybody's home. Search is where I think that they've really dropped the ball, and I think that one of the other consumer advantages that I think we're seeing play out here is just this ability for these companies to basically offer up really good suggestions. They're really smart about that. These recommendation engines are I think, something of a game changer versus the linear streams, even on a service where there's no ads.
Oh, we have one more question.
The thing that Netflix...
You bear a really bizarre resemblance to James Murdoch. I don't want to say anything, but...
Interesting you'd say that.
That's disconcerting.
The thing that Netflix is doing is genius if you look at it from the Jack Welch approach. Jack Welch used to say, if you can't be one or two in an industry, get the, pardon the French, fuck out of the industry. All of us combined, by the definition of impression today in digital, wouldn't be in the top 10 of impressions. So we should all get out of the impression business, right? Like all the networks combined wouldn't equal what BuzzFeed and YouTube and Facebook. So there's something wrong with the business that we're in. And if we don't fix that first, if we don't say we need a business that we can be in the top 1 or 2 of, which is engagement, high quality content, storytelling, if we don't make it about the businesses that we are number 1 or 2 in, we'll lose all day, and we might as well do the Netflix model.
And apparently we have time for one more question. You have Paul.
Hi, Ben Swinburne from Morgan Stanley. You touched a little bit on it in your conversation, which is programmatic buying. So my question to you is, do you think that the agencies are moving money from their clients through programmatic platforms, and that's accelerating the shift to digital? And if you do, what does that mean for how you sell your advertising? Do you need to change whether you embrace these platforms? Are you worried about them destroying the pricing environment? Just curious if there's an incentive at the agency level that's working against television, in your view.
I think there's a huge incentive against television at the agency level. It makes a ton of sense to move dollars to programmatic platforms if you own programmatic platforms.
Yeah, I mean, right now, there are figures out there that say that a dollar in this programmatic buying, 30 cents ends up getting to the ultimate publisher. 70 cents goes to middlemen along the way. And the programmatic is a new business for advertising agencies, and they're investing heavily in it and all the different aspects of it. And that is a challenge for us because they have an economic incentive to move that money out of television into areas where they have companies and trading desks and things like that that are generating revenues for them.
But I think, I'm not to be the one to finish this, but why not, is that is that all you're doing in programmatic is redefining something that has a line in the sand that has always been there. There's junk advertising and there's premium advertising. And, yeah, and junk advertising has always been a decent low margin business, and premium advertising has always been the business that we hope to get rich on. Thank you very much. This is great.